Novel Transcript, The Scent of My Son, In God We Trust, by Adrienne Miranda. It was now July 11th, 2007, and those who attended the meeting were Carroll County State's Attorney Jeremy Bynes, Joe Demonic, Lieutenant Rickards, Corporal Kitsing, Detective Monroe, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Kopsinger, Attorney Randy Apestein, Senator John Roaching, Jennifer Levi, Damian Gemma, Dino Gemma, Bob Miranda, Adrienne Miranda, Attorney Carl Frinz, Lisa, Sherry Blay, Rob Miranda Jr., MDSP Brian Perry, and several other unidentified men in plain clothes who sat behind us in chairs. We could not see them, but the police and Jeremy Bynes could see them from where they sat. We went around the room and introduced ourselves, and then Lieutenant Rickards opened the meeting with, "We only have the room for 1 hour, and this investigation has been deemed an accident." We were in total shock and dismay. We didn't understand why Lieutenant Rickards would convey the conclusion of the criminal investigation rather than the state prosecutor, Jeremy Bynes. I said, "Lieutenant Rickards, this is not what you had promised me at all. You said that we would be able to ask all of our questions and you would do your very best to attempt to answer them, and then, at a later date, State's Attorney Jeremy Bynes would give us his conclusion as to whether or not to prosecute." Then the first words out of State Attorney Jeremy Bynes' mouth were, "Are we being taped?" Lieutenant Rickards assured him there was no tape recording. Lieutenant Rickards was forceful and said, "I will not allow an argument or any further discussion on the conclusion. It is what it is." As we all sat in shock at the conference table, here is what continued to occur in that large meeting room and what we had to endure. We spoke up. "We still have many unanswered questions and conclusions from you that make absolutely no sense. Please at least give us the fairness to ask our questions." As we began our questioning, we asked why no reconstruction had been done for our son. I said, "Why did you not bring in a reconstructionist for my son? I know that the MDSP do reconstructions all day, every day when there is an accident or a death involving a vehicle. Why was this not done for my son?" They just looked at me stupidly with spite and said nothing. We continued that we knew that the MDSP had concealed and withheld information from us and that the medical examiner had changed Joseph's manner of death from accident to undetermined, with a strong possibility of homicide. We said we also knew that Joseph was definitely backed up over and asked, "Why do you keep saying Joseph was driven over forward? This is impossible." State's Attorney Jeremy Bynes denied receiving any letter from medical examiner Dr. Ali. We said, "What? We know the letter was sent to the MDSP and to you. My sister and I both spoke with your assistant, David Doggett, and he read part of Dr. Ali's letter to us. He was holding it right in his hands." They all continued to ignore Dr. Ali's letter, and so did Carroll County State's Attorney Jeremy Bynes. We were stunned by their deceit and overt manipulation. We then got to the crux of the cover-up of the case and asked Corporal Kitsing, "Where is Detective Bishtal's report?" My brother Damien and I both knew it was crucial to the case from the conversations Damien had with Dr. Ali, the medical examiner who did the autopsy on Joseph, and who met face-to-face with Detective Bishtal. These reports, we knew, proved foul play had occurred, and that Joseph was prone and then backed up over. Corporal Kitsing looked at my brother and me and said, Who is he?" He denied even knowing who Senior Detective Rick Bishtal was. At the same time, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Kopsinger, who is head of criminal investigations, Homeland Security and Immigration, and second in line just under the MDSP superintendent, turned beet red in the face, put his head down toward the table and said, just keep going. We could not believe what we were witnessing throughout this meeting. It was atrocious and appalling. Then Sergeant Monroe was going to read a report of Mr. Antoine Rubera, the driver of the Bobcat, that was at the bottom of Corporal Kitsing's pile of papers. Detective Monroe was sitting right next to Corporal Kitsing, but Kitsing kicked him under the table to stop him, even though Corporal Dan Kitsing knew for a long time that Joseph was driven over backward, and it was impossible that he fell through the two left tires. Corporal Kitsing continued the whole time during the investigation and up to and during this meeting to state that Joseph was driven over forward. He was revealing such stupidity and corruption that it was inconceivable. We also noticed that State Attorney Jeremy Bynes just doodled on a note tablet, basically said nothing, and just stared up the ceiling on and off for over an hour. We were not allowed to address most of our 41 questions, and then we asked, why are you going against the facts and science of the medical examiner and all 13 coroners who agreed about what happened to our son? Then the MDSP reconstructionist Brian Peer, who was present at the meeting, just said that he was never called to the scene on July 20th, 2006, when we asked. At that, Attorney Apestein said, Adrienne, do you think the MDSP could be corrupt? I said, I feel certain that outside unliving is corrupt, but I don't know. I put my faith and trust in these police to do their jobs. But I suppose it's very possible, given that all my family and I have witnessed here and continues to witness firsthand. Then Corporal Kitzing got up to the drawing board and made absolutely no sense in his reconstruction. He tried to draw a diagram of how Joseph fell through the 16-inch space between the two left tires and was driven over forward, with the tire crushing his head, and then the tire either driving backward over Joseph again or sitting on top of Joseph's head and then rolling off of Joseph's head backward. He made absolutely no sense at all. His physics were impossible, and these facts had already been told to the MDSP that this was impossible, and that Joseph was already flat on the ground when the left rear tire ran over his head and crushed him as the Bobcat was moving in reverse. Dr. Ali's letter also said Joseph was definitely not driven over twice, and the tire never just sat on top of Joseph's head. Even Brian Peer, the MDSP reconstructionist, just put his head down and said nothing. My brother, Damien, then asked to go up to the drawing board, and he drew and explained exactly what happened to Joseph. He drew the 16-inch space between the two left tires and the undercarriage toolbox that sat only 10 inches from the ground and showed that it would be impossible for even a contortionist midget to survive this without suffering any broken bones in his or her feet, ankles, legs, hip, and back. Joseph was 5 feet 10 and a half inches tall, and he had no broken bones below his neck. None. It was crystal clear that Joseph was already flat on the ground and then backed up over. There were also only back-up tread marks, and there was no forward motion whatsoever. Damien then returned to his seat. I then asked again about Dr. Zabiula Ali's letter and insisted it was sent because my sister Lisa and I had both talked with David Doggett, Carroll County's S.A. Jeremy Bynes' Assistant State's Attorney. Corporal Kitzing then reluctantly but finally pulled the letter out from the bottom of his pile and would not read it aloud. He actually handed it to us, Joseph's parents, and said, "Here, you read it." I cried as I heard Joseph's father read the words that Joseph Miranda was already prone on the ground, the rear left tire backed up over him, crushing his head, face, and neck, and there was undisturbed brain matter that clearly indicated there was never any forward motion. Dr. Ali insisted on further investigation, had changed the manner of death to undetermined, with a strong possibility of homicide, and until further investigation was completed, we will then finalize our conclusions. Clearly, from Dr. Ali's letter, Joseph was not driven over twice. There were only backward tire tracks, and the spotter's statement did not describe something that was possible and was a complete lie and blamed the victim. After reading Dr. Ali's letter, as allowed by Bob, I was in agony and tears and trying to absorb what I had just heard. All of my family was in shock. And then State's Attorney Jeremy Bynes yelled, "I never saw or received that letter, and you'd better not go to the media." Attorney Carl Frins had his arm around me trying to console me and said to Jeremy Bynes in a harsh tone, Hey, back off." I tried to keep my composure as best I could, and I looked directly at Lieutenant Rickard, who was seated across from me. I asked, "Who is responsible for all of this and ultimately in charge of what is taking place here?" Lieutenant Rickards looked directly back at me and said, "Him. He is." He pointed to his left, to Lieutenant Colonel Tim Kopsinger, the coward and evil man who turned beet red in the face. My brothers and I just looked at one another with disbelief. We noticed that during the entire meeting, Senator John Roaching never opened his mouth, nor did Joe Dominic, the investigator for State's Attorney Jeremy Bynes. After Lieutenant Rickards had pointed to Lieutenant Colonel Copsinger, Attorney Carl Friend said, "I have something very important to say. We have strong reason to believe that Mr. Miranda was not even killed in Carroll County, but in Baltimore County. Adrienne and her brother have done the research and pulled several parcels and plats that confirm this." At that, Jeremy Bynes turned red and screamed, "I know my county, where I pay my taxes and where the lines are. I have lived here all my life. You are wrong." He then swiftly got out of his seat and ran out of the room. We were told, "This meeting is over." And when Carl Friends asked Lieutenant Dean Richardson if he would please send all the police reports to him, Lieutenant Richardson said to put it in writing, and he would do his best. As I tried to wipe my tears, gather myself, and collect my papers, notes, and my leather satchel, my brothers helped me walk and move away from the table. They were standing with me when Corporal Kitzing came up to me and said with a mean, harsh, and nasty tone, "A bobcat killed your son." We said, "No, that is untrue," and then we walked away. I did go over to Lieutenant Rickards and thanked him anyway for trying to help. I had remembered during the meeting when we were in such shock, and we looked directly across the table at Lieutenant Rickards and asked, "Who is doing this and allowing this to happen?" He looked directly back at us and pointed to his left where Lieutenant Colonel Tim Copsinger was sitting. We knew, as agonizing and devastating as it was, and despite the living hell we had been put through, that Lieutenant Colonel Tim Copsinger was at the core of all the lies, hidden reports, deception, and cover-up. Lieutenant Rickard said he was very sorry about everything and that he was going to be leaving the country and moving to Canada. I wished him well. Attorney Carl Friends then walked out with me, and as we were leaving the room, Attorney Randy Apestein said to me, "Adrienne, if it ends up that your son was killed in Baltimore County, call me and I will help you." I thanked him and said okay. As we exited the building and walked down the steps, Attorney Friends was holding my arm. We knew WBAL Channel 11 and their reporter would be there. Carl Friends talked to Bob, Joseph's father, and me, and conveyed to us to be very careful about what we say to reporters. You can't use Pete Coldman's name, and you should just be rather brief about the outcome of the meeting and what you believe occurred. We both understood, and as we walked, reporter David Collins approached us with his microphone and camera crew, and we answered his questions and said how we felt and that we believed a crime and wrongdoing against our son had taken place. Later, I tried to call Lieutenant Rickards to see if he would offer me anything, because at first I trusted him. He did not take my call, but another detective got on the phone and said that while they agreed that, yes, they knew there were serious inconsistencies, contradictions, and untruths, there were just no explanations for them. They would not further investigate. They agreed that, yes, it would only make sense that my son's legs and feet would have been severely injured, but they were sticking to their story. I felt such a deep hole in my center, and God was calling me to his purpose. Father God was my rock and my refuge.